Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get going in a couple minutes here. Kurt, you can just thumbs up. Did you manage to get the list to people in the chat? You did. So most of you should have seen it. We'll put it up again in the chat here in just a moment. But I'll go off. We're starting with the Highland Malt 93, then the Orkney Malt 2005, the Glenlivet 2007, the Glen Garioch 91, the Edradour 2005 Equilibrium, the Springbank 1995, and then the Islay Malt 1990. Really quickly, I don't want to waste too much time on this because we're thrilled to have Angus here, and I know it's late in the day where he is. But for those who don't know, we're having our door crasher sale this weekend. So in store and online, everything in the shop, wine, spirits, beer, past tasting kits, even 5 to 50% off. And we've got other cool tastings coming up in the weeks ahead. Just going to quickly pull one of these up. If you're in town, we've got some Valentine's Day themed tastings, including a whiskey and chocolate tasting with Harmony that's coming up on, I think it's Thursday or is it Friday? It's Friday. It's coming up on Friday. So you've got a bit of time there if you want to sign up for it. Next Tuesday, a week Tuesday, I should say, Lost in Translation virtual tasting. We're doing a Japanese whiskey range, mostly Nika, because that's all we seem to get in Canada, but that's what we've got. Bladnoch tasting following that. And then I'll just show this one here. The next one coming up with a special guest is the Boutique 10th anniversary tasting with Dave Worthington on February 25th. There's still a few spots left for that, but we've got a pretty killer lineup for it. And given that most of you probably signed up for this tasting through the website, I'm pretty sure you know where to find our tastings, but I'm going to fire that into the chat. Before we get into the whiskeys, I want to just say thank you to Igor Kosov for an opportunity to get some of these whiskeys. Some of these were extremely limited. I know one of them, I think just 6 bottles came into the country. And when things like that happen, we love the opportunity to share them in a tasting. I mean, it's great that, 5 or 6 people might get a really cool bottle, but if 40 people can sample it and share it together, that's pretty awesome. I also want to say a big thank you to Angus MacRaild, who certainly many of you who read our newsletter or follow our website know that we're huge fans of Angus and both Surge and Whiskey Fun. But also Angus has had a blog for a long time, The Whiskey Sponge, and just love the irreverent sense of humor in that. And some of the inside jokes at the industry that maybe people outside it wouldn't always get, but those inside it will get a good chuckle out of. So Angus, we're absolutely thrilled to have you with us tonight. And before we get into the whiskeys, I wonder if you maybe might give people a little bit of a background on how you got into whiskey, because you're bottling whiskey now, but you've been in the industry for a while now.
Yeah, so I never intended to even be working in whiskey. It just ended up sort of accidentally doing it through not being qualified to do anything else, was the most honest answer I can give to that. I was interested in whiskey from a very young age. When we moved from Scotland down to England, when I was about four years old, I ended up missing Scotland quite a lot. And so I was interested in Scottish music, Scottish food, and really always keen to go back up and visit our relatives up there. And then my dad was really into Lafroig, and I remember reading the back of the bottle and listening to him tell me why he liked it. And I think he gave me like a little pinky drop taste when I was pretty young, and I think he thought it would be funny, and just ended up creating a monster instead by mistake. So years later I was reading books about it and just really into it. And then while I was at university studying film, I went and got a tour guide seasonal job at Ardbeg, and I was working at Ardbeg Distillery 2005, 2006, and a bit of 2007 as well. And that was really quite a formative experience, like a deep dive into the world of whiskey for me, and that was my first experience meeting like hyper nerds from Europe that just came with car boots full of samples that looked like urine bottles and stuff like that. So it was really sort of, yeah, like I say, a little deep dive into that world. And from there, just sort of organically stumbled around working in whiskey bars with wine and whiskey merchants in Glasgow, worked in a vineyard in Alsace, was just really interested in, I suppose, a world of like fine alcohol and its associated culture, and just wanted to learn a lot, really. And then I worked in whiskey auctioneering for a while. That was like my first proper job in whiskey. When I came back from traveling in 2011, I started working for a whiskey auction company in Glasgow. So I already knew a fair bit about old bottles and old and rare whiskies, and that's really like my background. My sort of niche, if you like, was always old style whiskey and the flavors of it and the sort of history. So I worked in auctioneering, started at quite a good time and also got out at quite a good time before it became too crazy. And since then, just worked for myself, doing writing, consultancy, did Whiskey Sponge, did Whiskey Fun eventually. And then Whiskey Sponge just sort of coincidentally, naturally became a bottling as a hobby thing. And that became Decadent Drinks, which is the company we run now. So who knows where or what I'll be doing in 10 years from now, because it's all been just a bit of a make it up on the hoof. I'm the first generation of people working in whiskey where the industry is sort of big enough now and the culture is big enough to support a kind of independent job like mine, like an independent role that you just sort of invent as you go.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that it kind of happened somewhat by accident. I mean, that my own entry into the liquor business was supposed to be temporary. I was going to be a delivery driver for my mom's friend's wine shop for 2 months at Christmas. And I got into whiskey and I just never left, and eventually bought out my employer. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people in the industry today that never had a grand vision of making a career out of it, but it's funny how life kind of takes you sometimes in a direction you're not expecting.
Someone asked me there, how long have I been bottling or running Decadent Drinks? We started bottling 2019 and the company was formally founded. We started as a partnership, just as like a little hobby bottler, and formally became a company in September 2020. So yeah, 2 and a bit years would be the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and you've released some pretty cool bottlings over the way, and certainly we love the sense of humor of them. I know the first ones I became aware of were the Patter Sponge bottlings. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Richard Patterson is, he's a legend in the industry and he's quite a character, but I mean, to see a caricature of him in a bathtub on the label of a whiskey is pretty epic.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether we would get away with that, but we bought those bottlings from Signatory and they let us use the label. So yeah, I can't complain. There's a lot of stuff we did early on that we wouldn't get away with now. Like we did, our edition 7 was a unnamed Glenmorangie 1985. And so because we couldn't name it, just called it Highland Single Malt. I just put a giraffe on the label with a bunch of in a gimp mask with a bunch of dildos around its neck, and had like a little hen coop at the back saying the 15 hens of pain, riffing on the 16 men of Tain for a Glenmorangie. You would not be allowed to bottle that now because apparently anything remotely to do with sex is frowned upon on whiskey labels. So yeah, the opportunities for having a laugh get narrower all the time, unfortunately, with whiskey regulations. But yeah, that was a great pair of bottlings, the Patter Sponge pair, the Dalmore 91 and Jura 91. They're really beautiful whiskies. I was very pleased with them. But yeah, should we chat about the first dram, or?
Yeah, let's do it. I'm just pulling up pulling it up from our website. So that's the Highland Malt 1993. And everything in stores on sale today, Angus. So it's not your bottles, but just literally everything. So that's what.
No, that's okay. Don't worry. I'm all for like rigorous retail sales techniques. I fully support it. So Whiskey Sponge Highland Malt edition 59B. So this is a 1993 single Highland Malt, and it's refill hogshead, full term matured, 28 years old, and bottled at 46.1% natural cask strength. So we got 2 casks of this, and they were both kind of subtly different. And I thought, instead of putting them together as one small batch release. It'd be quite nice to do them as separate ones and do a little theme. I always liked the language of old blends, like Stewart's Cream of the Barley, or MacPhail's Pride of Strathspey, and all this sort of flowery, elaborate language. And in Scotland, there's a bread called Mother's Pride, and it's quite a sort of iconic Scottish bread in Scotland. You guys probably never heard of it, but that's where Pride of Sponge comes from. It's a sort of riffing on that. And then Cream of Sponge was very much a sort of play on these sort of old blends and the kind of old fashioned language of some Scotch whiskies. I won't tell you what this is yet because I want to see everyone have a guess about what distillery this is. I'm really liking that someone has automatically said Big Cheese on the nose. That could possibly be a quote, a hint. We'll see. But I like these drams because, in my view, they express a style I really like, which is very, very naked, distillate forward style of whiskey. Nowhere to hide, charismatic distillate in refill wood for 28 years. So they're well-rounded. Time and oxygen have done a lot of heavy lifting here and brought out a lot of nuances and intricacies in the distillate, in the distillate profile, without adding too much to it. So you don't really get a lot of wood character, a lot of wood domination. It's quite a niche style of whiskey. It's not a style which I would describe as necessarily popular or sexy. One thing I've learned through doing bottling is that I have deeply uncommercial tastes, and it's caused problems for us at some points. But I'm curious to see what people think, or if people want to have a guess at what the distillery is. Please go ahead. I will tell you in a short while, but I'm always interested to people's reactions to this one.
Without taking away other opportunities for people to guess, this whiskey reminds me of spirit from a distillery not far from the A9 that has a brewing connection to a Scottish king. Would be the one, like if I were to just wildly stab at it. I don't know if that's too oblique a reference for most of you, but
well, there's also, if any of you know this part of Scotland and know your geography and local businesses, the sibling bottling to this, edition 59A, with the Cream of Sponge, with a sort of a soup can on the label, that's quite a strong hint to which distillery this is. So people guessing things like Balmenic or Loch Lomond, I think these are, and when someone says cheesy, the whiskey that I think of when I think of cheese is Feta Cairn. This is not Feta Cairn, but I would understand why people would say that. And there's a note that I get in this, which is like peanut oil or groundnut oil. I find a lot of that in this whiskey, or like sesame oil or something, some sort of cooking oils. People saying, so Doug Page says Glen Scotia. It's not Glen Scotia, but that is.
I think he's going there because of the Campbell, the soup reference you mentioned, I think is Doug's guess on that.
It's not Ben Rinnes.
Why it's not likely to be Ben Rinnes because I'm not generally fond of Ben Rinnes, and I actually quite like the nose and palate on this one.
And I'm not gonna tell anything.
Yeah.
Because I know. And by the way, guys, the second bottling also that Angus referred coming soon to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Good. There you go.
Yeah.
Kurt,
yeah, I mean, if you like this one, you'll like the other one as well. So,
any of you want to guess on this one?
It's not Chinninich.
I don't think it's fruity enough for Chinninich. I find more orangey top notes to it, I think, if it was Chinninich.
Yeah, it's one of those ones it's really still focused on the raw ingredients. Like, it's a lot of barley, a lot of cereal, and if there's fruit in there, it's more, I think, more like kind of lemon peel, slightly citrusy, but not overtly fruity. I will tell you what it is. It's Tullibardine.
Probably
Tullibardine
cereal
is,
forward.
yeah, is in a place called Blackford in Scotland, and it has right next to it Baxter's Soup Factory. And that was the reference on Pride of Sponge, really. Sorry, Cream of Sponge. Yeah. So
I assume that was Andrew's first guess when he said close to the A9 there. So I thought you were kind of poo-pooing that, so I moved away from that. But yeah,
he was correct. He was
Yeah.
correct. But I think I got the impression that he knew. So I was just I was leaving him to dangle in the wind for a while.
No, I had a strong suspicion. I just didn't want to spoil the fun before other people had the chance to guess. So,
It's always really difficult doing blind tastings like this or guessing stuff because it's such your nose and your brain plays such tricks on you. We had to do a tasting at Whiskey Live Paris recently where they gave us 6 drams blind, and it's just impossible. And one of them was a cask sample, which is always cheating in my view. You can't have a blind tasting and say, having a blind tasting and guess the bottle is one thing. Blind tasting, guess the cask sample. That's really unfair. It's a realm of difficulty beyond anyone. Is Cream of Sponge same distillery? Yes, it is. Yeah, they're both, they're like sibling casks of 1993 Tullibardine. And that, yeah, and I think they're very lovely within this style. And I think the fact that they have quite an easy cask strength. So the Cream of Sponge is like 44.5 or something. And then this one 46.1. So they're naturally at that kind of perfect drinking strength. And I think that works really well because you can just slug a big dram into a tumbler like this and just have a nice big sip. And it's a very pleasurable way to enjoy whiskey, and that's not too complicated and, you know, just a relaxing way to enjoy whiskey, I think.
yeah. I remember when Tullibardine was relaunched after John Black and the guys got in there in the early 2000s, and some of everyone really loved the 60s stuff and the 70s stuff, but some of my favorite whiskeys that came out of there were the ones from the late 80s, like 88 sticks in my mind.
That's what I was thinking this was like.
Yeah, and that's for me like drawing a bit of an approximation to it. Most of the 90s stuff we saw was not quite this mature, but this is for its age, quite a naked whiskey. Like there's a bit of oak character there, but lots of spirit character. And it's just, yeah, it's a nostalgia dram for me. I remember those really pale, light 1988 Tullibardines that came in the flimsy wooden box or cardboard boxes. And this really reminds me of that.
It's such a funny distillery in that I don't know, it makes very good whiskey. Like one of my, it's not always made very good whiskey. And I think the thing that it's suffered from over the years is poor cask selection or careless cask selection on the part of the owners. And it has had various owners. So that's always a bit of a problem as well sometimes. But one of my other sort of jobs, so to speak, is I'm one of the panel chairs for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. And through doing that work, I get to taste a lot of cask samples of, you know, so like just multiple standard bourbon barrels and hogsheads of young Tullibardine. And the distillate's always great. It's one of those distilleries that I think really improved in, say, the last sort of 30 years compared to a lot of other distilleries that seem to sort of either go down or they become quite homogenized and safe. But Tullibardine still has quite charismatic distillate, and it's one that still feels quite Highland. It just needs, I don't know, just needs a better sort of branding makeover. Someone should buy it and just change the name of the distillery.
Well, I mean, I'd take you one step further on that, Angus, and I'd say someone needs to buy it and put it back on the path that it was going under before the unnamed French company took it over and dropped all the ABVs and kind of took some.
No, I'd agree with you. Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like with so many distilleries, the independent companies have better examples of, or truer examples of the distillery and the distillery character and the distillate than the official bottlings express themselves. You can say that about almost any distillery, I think, really, apart from, you know, the obvious ones, like someone saying similar to what you might expect from Daffmill. I think that's fair comment. It's got that kind of grassy oiliness about it, which I associate with Daffmill. So yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. Should we move on to the Orkney Malt? And I know Kurt's especially excited about this one.
Man, it was
Cool.
that label. You could have put anything in that bottle, and that throwback to the old Orkney kind of thing was wicked. As soon as that hit our shelves, it was tickled pink.
I'm very pleased that you say that because I really love so we own the old Orkney brand. I bought it from Gordon MacPhail very deliberately because they'd done nothing with it, and it was just not their fault or anything. It was just something they had sat there, and I thought maybe they'd sell it. And I knew that there was all these Orkney malt things on the market, and I sort of thought, well, maybe we could do something a bit bigger with it, and we may yet do something more sort of directly, explicitly with the old Orkney brand. But for now, this is just me playing around with it because I can really, and also because I just love Orkney and I love Orkney whiskies, and I thought I'd like to do something because I had in mind something like Islay sponge. I thought, well, why don't we do Orkney sponge? You know, just do these little geographical little offshoots for just for fun, really. And yeah, so we bought Orkney, Old Orkney, and I love it because it was really the first brand that I know of that explicitly was about fun and about having fun and being playful and being witty and being a bit different. And those are all attributes that I would hope Decadent Drinks possesses. It's certainly things we've tried to do with Decadent Drinks, and I think Old Orkney was quite a bit of inspiration for me, really, in my approach to whiskey and whiskey brand, you know, the sort of branding product side of it, which I'm still learning about. You know, it's still really early days for us at Decadent Drinks, but yeah, I really love this label. I'm glad you like it. I think it's I think the 00 logo just worked so you know, perfectly with the sort of riffing on the idea of the sponges, lopsided eyes. And also I just like labels like this where you get this beautiful text, very simple, but most importantly, it's good whiskey. You know, these stocks, these Orkney malt stocks, they're all Highland Park, and it goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. You know, this is a much more traditional, true, honest and raw expression of Highland Park distillery character than you get in the standard 12-year-old. I still quite like a lot of the Highland Park bottlings. I don't like all their Viking bullshit, but you know, I feel like if they ever met a real Viking, they'd shit their cornflakes. But I think that a lot of the you know, the best examples of Highland Park spirit on the market in bottle are in these independent bottlings and in these sorts of stocks. I love these ones because, as you're probably nosing, I think you get a really fresh, quite vivid whiskey that's very evocative. I think it makes you think of the coast, of the sea. I think it makes you think of a very specific type of Orcadian peat. Like, there's something about the flavor of peat from Orkney that's different and distinct from Islay. And that's something I think is really beautiful. People don't talk about peat nearly enough as an ingredient in malt whiskey. And if people want to talk about terroir in whiskey, you know, peat is like the most obvious route through which terroir can be realized in whiskey in a meaningful and emphatic and even a scientifically demonstrable way. Like, there's been studies talking about the different flavor of peat coming from different regions, not even from Islay or Orkney, but from different bogs in mainland Scotland. So it's a fascinating and I think still underexplored aspect of Scotch whiskey, and a genuine ingredient. Like, it's not listed as an ingredient in Scotch whiskey, but it absolutely is in my view. So yeah, I love these stocks because they have a sort of light but very definite peat flavor. They're very pure, they're very fresh, they're very coastal, and they have a texture in the mouth. You know, you really feel like you're drinking a textural, distillate forward, but, you know, really well-rounded whiskey when you're having this kind of dram. And this is one where it was just a single cask, a refill hogshead of 2005, but we reduced it by quite a few degrees. I think it was above 60, and I brought it down to 55 just because, you know, at 60 was a bit sharp, but at 55 it works really well. It was just more rounded. You have a bit more interplay of sort of light citrusy fruits, but you still have that nice, very definite peat and saltiness and freshness, and everything just sort of sat in a bit more harmony and balance. So, and this is, you know, this is something we do with quite a lot of our bottlings, this targeted reduction. It's really just a way for us to put a bit of our personal stamp on the bottlings we're releasing or on the products we're creating. Because when you're doing independent bottling, you're just dealing with finished product most of the time. And doing single cask at cask strength, perfectly legitimate, tried and tested way to bottle whiskey. But having something a little bit extra or different you can add in that gives it a personal touch, creates something that wouldn't otherwise exist. That's the kind of thing I'm always looking for opportunities to do. I mean, we of course do plenty single casks, cask strength, but you know, when the opportunity presents to mix it up and do something a bit different, we take it. And that's absolutely what happened with this one and with the follow-up Orkney Sponge 3 bottling.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, no, it's, as you said, it's got a really nice texture to it, nice mouthfeel. It is, you know, on the pale side and maybe not a ton of oak in there, but it's got really lovely flavors, works well. And I just want to give a shout out to Jamie for their flashback tasting note to Orange Julius in the food court. Maybe not so much on the nose, but on the palate, I definitely get that. And Angus, that might be a reference that, I don't know if Orange Julius was a Canadian thing, but it was these, I don't know, these terrible orange smoothies that you would get. You get an orange smoothie and a hot dog in like the big malls. This is back in the old days. And yeah, they smelled like kind of orange chalky vitamins.
would it be something akin to Sunny Delight, or is that
Yeah, but they make it with, I think they made it with real oranges in front of you, and they make this kind of frothy, milky orange drink from you. To be
milky
honest,
orange drink? That sounds
and very sweet.
sounds
Like,
hellish.
it's probably is not very good for like people watching their blood sugar levels and stuff like that, but it was popular back in the day.
Introducing a milkshake with egg white powder. This sounds, oh my God, this sounds really awful.
Yeah,
I feel upset just thinking about it.
this
is why Canada's not a dominant global power, because of these
it's probably.
orange abominations.
But being in northern climate, people got to get their vitamin C somehow. So
And it's coming from like somebody whose country produces iron brew. So it's
Yeah, the iron
incredible.
brew is exquisite. You ever had sufficiently cellared, long aged iron brew?
No, that's a challenge.
Well, you're missing out. I mean, it makes Chateau Yquem taste like bum water. I guarantee
All
you.
right. One of these days, find somebody that's laid some down.
Well, you should lay some down, and then we'll start ironbrewauctioneer.com, and we'll really clean up. We can retire.
I want to know, James Bourne, how you know that egg white powder. Did you work at an Orange Julius back in the day? Is that where that secret intel comes from? T Camel says it.
You watch them put it in, like they add it to it.
I don't.
And it's
I think
so
I might have had.
frothy.
I think I might have had one in my life and decided I never needed another. I will admit I went there for the hot dogs of uncertain age from time to time in my youth, but that's about it. Anyway,
When I eventually get around to doing exclusive bottling for Igor, I'm just going to make it
an Orange
some
Julius
oranges and some milk and some egg white powder.
Angus,
really commercial.
the trademark on Orange Julius is probably expired. You can probably just put the cup right on the label. But back to the whiskey, Kurt, Sean, Harmony, any of you guys have any opinions or thoughts on this before we move on?
Yeah, dumpier, heavier whiskey than the last one in all the right ways, kind of to me, even though it's still got that kind of sharp coastal edge to it. You get a bit of like sweaty horse blanket kind of coming through, and the palate is really sweet malt and really chalky. It's cool. I think when we poured it, the samples, I think Sammy was pouring, and he poured a tiny little bit in a glass, and I was so excited for this label. And what I had in that glass was kind of like, yeah, it's okay. This shows way, way, way better today. So I'm digging it today. Happy with this one.
Needed to
Both of these bottlings, the Orkney Sponge 3 and Orkney Sponge 2, both of them I noticed benefit a lot with time in the bottle. I've got just some heels of the bottle left of both of them, of my tasting stock, and they're really showing really well. And I think the thing about intervening with whiskey at a very late stage, like just reducing, and even more so when you make a small batch and you mix two casks together, this is a big shock to the whiskey system. And so it takes probably a few years in bottle for the whiskies to settle down and integrate properly. But that's why I think a lot of these things mean that these whiskies will probably be better in bottle 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, because of taking these actions at this point. And they show well, obviously, anyway, because we try to bottle good whiskies that are good immediately anyway. But I'm also thinking about when we bottle, hopefully we're going to take decisions and do things which will lead to whiskies which will really evolve well into the future and show well in the future. There's a bit, we can say that about a few of the things we're trying tonight, where we made decisions and along these sorts of lines. But I'm glad people like the Orkney Sponge bottlings. I was really pleased with them. I think they're just my kind of whiskey, pure, vivid, lots of distillery character, very evocative, sort of whiskies that I can just have a dram of and think, yeah, this feels like Orkney to me, which is,
And yes,
if you've never been
and
to Orkney, I really recommend it. I
yeah.
recommend you go and stand on the cliffs of Yesnaby on a very windy, cold day and wear only a t-shirt and pour a large dram of this, and you will feel alive. And you'll be able to do it for like 2 minutes before getting back in the car, because you'll be probably hypothermic, but I recommend it thoroughly.
Yeah, it's very Orkney. It's absolutely like fresh air of the Orkney.
So someone asks, so James asks, what can you do to affect whiskey evolution in bottle, cask selection, something from the bottling process? Yeah, so in terms of affecting it, that's something that is much more governed, I think, by what journey the bottle goes on once it's bottled. So the environment it's stored in, is it exposed to light, fluctuations in temperature? Is it stored on its side? Is it stored standing up? All these sorts of things will affect the the way the whiskey will evolve in bottle. But I do think that if we put two casks together and we select them carefully and we think these are two casks that are going to work well together, certainly with, we don't have our own warehouse. We have to rely on bottling partners, and most of our bottling partners, particularly when we've done a lot of these bottlings with Signatory, where we've done multi-vintage small batch bottlings, and Signatory won't marry for us. They'll just say, right, pick the casks, smush them together and stick them in a bottle. So it's quite a violent process, but it means that I think there's still a lot of chemical integration and reactions happening in the bottle that will go on for, 5-10 years, maybe more, maybe longer. And same with reduction. Adding water is a shock to a whiskey system after that. I think that whiskey's been sitting in a cask for 16 years, just very slowly changing and evolving, taking things in, losing stuff, reacting to oxygen, all these things. So adding water is a shock, and it'll still be reacting to that shock, for a fair while after it's bottled, I think. Mm-hmm. So these are the sort of things that I think it's, taking these decisions leads to, I think a more interesting whiskey in the long run. So yeah. Does anyone else want to ask any more questions about the Orkney bottlings?
I am curious about Sean and Harmony's notes on this one too. They both got pretty wicked palates.
So there's something, I'm not sure, it's not just this whiskey, and I don't think it's just Orkney, but there's this thread that I'm picking up on whiskeys where it seems like the acidity is a bit more poignant, and this kind of has some of that for me. And I'm not always wild about it, but I do enjoy this one because it's reminding me of there's some of those super new school high-end restaurants that do these I don't know, weird experimental dishes, and it reminds me of a smoked sour porridge that I had at one point somewhere, where it's just kind of slightly lactic and that nice little hit of smoke and minerality, but the barley is just kind of nice and in your face, and it's all intermingling really well, like a bit of a, I don't know, like a side dish almost. It's kind of cool.
I notice acidity in whiskey more than I used to. I'm not sure if it's because I know more about wine than I used to, or taste more wine, or if it's just because the way my palate's evolving as I get older. But I certainly notice it more, and I think about it more, and I record it more when I'm writing notes for whiskey, more than I used to, for sure. Cool. Should we go on to the next dram?
Absolutely.
All right. So next dram is it's the Glenlivet 07, I believe.
It is indeed.
Yeah, cool. So this is a single cask of Glenlivet 2007. So it's a first fill sherry hogshead, 13 years old, and bottled with quite considerable reduction this time to 53%. This is from a big parcel of casks that Signatory purchased, and I really love these casks. I think they're very good sherry casks. They're modern style, which is to say, I think a bit more spicy active oak is involved here. But there's still obviously a lot of interesting sherry characteristic being brought into the whiskey here. And a lot of people have bottled these, but most of the time people do them at cask strength. And the cask strength on this batch of casks is extremely high. It's up around, hovers between about 65 and 66.5. It's really, in my opinion, too high. I know some people like, intense, crazy, spirits at that kind of strength, but for me, it's too brutal. It's too monolithic and too, I think, too simple. I think you miss something, because these casks have also got a lot of fruit character and a lot of nuance and nice chocolatey sherry flavors, quite a lot of classic sort of dark fruit, chocolatey, earthy, tobacco, leathery fruit, lovely flavors that you associate with traditional sherry whiskies. So we took this one right. I was going to do 57.1, but in the end I thought, no, I'd just go lower. Let's go 53%, because I think it just brought out so much easiness in the whiskey. And for me, we all spend so long talking about and tasting cask strength whiskies, but really whiskey should be about pleasure. And sometimes I just want a dram to be easy and approachable and very pleasurable and very simple and very easy to just literally put in your mouth and drink. And it sounds crazy, doesn't it? But so that was really the idea behind the decision making on this one. It was, what can we do to bring out the sort of really juicy, gooey, fruity heart of this whiskey and just present it in a way that is a lot easier than perhaps many of the other casks in this parcel that have been bottled. So that was the sort of idea behind that. And so, yeah, so some nice comments here. Reminds me of the old G&M sherry bombs. Don't want to stop smelling this one. That's cool. I'm always happy when I see sort of feedback like that. That's cool. And things, yeah, nose is sweet, dried fruity tobacco leaf. Yeah, all classical sherry flavors that I think you get quite a lot of in this dram.
This is old school sherry. This
Yeah,
is
Kurt,
like, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, you and I were texting a bit on this. Like, the nose on this is absolutely gorgeous. I was not expecting this. To be honest, I threw this in the lineup, and I hope you'll talk about it in a moment. But I threw it in the lineup because I love the label on it, and I wanted you to talk about the label. But I'm not normally a fan of new school sherry, but this is about as good as you can get from young new school sherry.
Yeah, I agree. And it was also interesting. I was talking to Igor the other day, and he was telling me that a lot of people think Glenlivet is just, they associate it with just cheap, crappy, I don't know, sort of,
Unless it's from Gordon
supermarket budget style whiskey, which is a shame, because I think Glenlivet can make really lovely spirit and works really well with certainly with a sherry cask. It can be fantastic. The label, so this is a total in joke. This is like a total company in joke. This is my business partner Stephen, who is he's a co-director of Decadent Drinks, and he's in charge of like numbers and finance, and so he has got proper experience in business. I'm not a business person. I'm a very annoying creative person who gets in the way of business people and comes up with expensive, like stupid pie in the sky ideas and says, but why can't we spend extra money on this needlessly expensive paper stock for this bottle because I love the whiskey. So Stephen's the one that says to me, Angus, we can't afford to do that. And does all our spreadsheets and modeling, and I work with him on modeling our bottling plan. And he is, with his big business background, and he's sort of a physicist, and so he loves data. He says to me, we need data. And yeah, so he's just got like this absolute data fetishization. So I decided to create a label which was themed around Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Stephen as a kind of a data godhead within the minds of, so the sponge is like this emaciated little character toiling away in the data mines, got his business plan on the fridge there. It's really just a sort of, it's taking the piss out of Stephen and also taking the piss out of me. And in a way that no customer of ours anywhere in the world has a clue of understanding. So I really relied on just the fact this was a dark sherried whiskey to sell this one, and had some fun with the label. So that's the reasoning.
Well, that's cool.
That's the honest story.
And it's interesting you make that point, and I love the transparency also about the diluting bottles down to a strength where you feel they're going to drink better, because I mean, this is gorgeous. I can't imagine this at 65%. I think it would like blow your head off.
It was fine, but it was very brutal. And what's much more prominent at 65, 66% in these casks is the wood and very specifically the wood spices. So you're really getting that tannin and that lactone and that very kind of peppery wood spice. Water at that, that kind of crash dilution going down by like 12, 13 degrees in alcohol immediately, violent and vigorous, and it's exactly what the whiskey needs to really shake it up and bring out all those lovely fruity congeners and all the other oils. And it's a whiskey that I go back to, and every time I go back to it I think, yeah, we really made the right decision here, because I wasn't sure. I spent a lot of time with the cask sample at sort of 3 or 4 different strengths, different reductions, trying to figure out which one I thought was best. But in the end, I opted for the lowest that we were looking at, for 53. And yeah, I'm very happy with the result. I think it hits that right balance. It's a lovely strength, 53. We use it quite a lot because it retains quite a lot of the power of cask strength. But if you've gone down by several degrees, then it's bringing in a lot of freshness, and you're getting quite a different whiskey from, if the cask strength was naturally above 57, if you go down to 53, you're getting quite a different whiskey, and often I think a better whiskey. But that's just my personal opinion. But then, with decadent drinks, if you're buying into our products, you're sort of buying into, like, I suppose, my taste and my ideas and the way I want a whiskey, the way I want you to be experiencing a whiskey. There's other companies that do just unvarnished, as nature intended, as it comes from the wood, and they do it very well. And that's a perfectly legitimate way to do bottling, but I suppose it's not quite my way to do bottling.
Oh, that's beautiful. Kurt, Harmony, any thoughts? Harmony's put a bunch of them into the chat.
Yeah, I want to hear from Harmony because I've been talking too much.
No, I love this, and I'm typically, as most of you know, I like the classic ex-bourbon style Scotch, but I love the dryness. Like, it's so fruity at the same time. There's so many big flavors going on, but then it just dries out at the finish. At the same time, leaving lots of, like, my mouth is still salivating, but it feels dry, and I just want to keep drinking it. Kevin's nodding. He knows what I mean. You're getting those leather tannins and that dark chocolate, but you're still getting this like fruitiness, and then the alcohol of it just keeps your mouth watering. There is still a long finish. You don't have to chase this. The flavor of it, you can just kind of let it sit in your mouth, but dangerously smooth and approachable. This would be a bottle I could easily enjoy with friends by the fire, smoking cigars, and crush it happily in an evening. I'm really enjoying it. And I've I've always been a fan of Glenlivet, even their cheap core stuff. As you said, that's how they're perceived, but I think it's really beautiful and I'm really enjoying it. Thank you.
It's definitely a cigar whiskey. I totally
Yeah.
agree with you on that. I would,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely chomp a cigar with this.
Definitely.
Sean, anything you want to add before we move on?
I mean, I'll pair it everyone else, but yeah, like I love that it's like this cool incense wood and cherry cola and just like those. I don't know. Now I'm wondering if maybe one of the reasons why Kurt likes it too, because like those like cherry cola, I know you like kind of you latch onto that on a few things, but yeah, it's just it's a banger. I do have a question. So when you're experimenting with proofing these down, like do you proof a sizable sample kind of like right away and then just kind of like see how it goes over the course of a month kind of thing, or?
Well, so what I do, I have an e-hydrometer, an Anton Par electric hydrometer, which I can use to get accurate strengths. And I have a thing of distilled water, so like pure water. And I just get the cast sample home and I put, a few centiliters into, say, 3 different sample bottles. And I just reduce down and make sure I'm getting to the exact strength I want. So drop by drop almost to get to 53 or 48.5 or 55 or 57.1. And then I'll leave them for a few days, go back and then just, line them up and nose and taste. And I'll try to take my time enough before committing to something that I've been able to do that during the day in perhaps a more formal analytical way. And also that I've gone back to them in an evening at some point, like after dinner, because I think that the one thing that the whiskey industry on a sort of big commercial scale, like you go to the blending labs where people that are making most whiskey bottlings are working. These are not environments in which consumers drink whiskey. Like I think it's important to try and spend a bit of time with something you're going to bottle and think about how people will experience it in the sort of environment and with the sort of palate at the sort of time of day and the type of mood they'll be in a way that they're much more likely to commonly, engage with that product. I think that's quite an important thing that is often missed. And so I try to give myself an opportunity to do that, as well as something that's a bit more, during the day, analytical, very clean palate sort of approach. And between doing that, both sides of that, I think that's enough. You start to build up enough of a picture as to what the decision should be about what strength you want to use. Maybe you want to mix these casks together, you want to keep them separate, or whatever your final decisions about how you do a bottling are, you get to a position of comfort with it and you feel, confident about doing it.
I've always struggled with the concept of, here's the blender's notes down at 20%. Nobody's drinking it at 20%. Nobody cares. That's the one thing I've ever agreed with, that he who shall not be named in one of his crappy books years ago, he put something in the introduction about why he was using the cask strength. And if he adds water, it's never going to be the same whiskey that we're tasting. It can never be. There's never a control at that point. You're never going to add the same amount of water as I do. So I appreciate you taking down to a level where you think it's apex. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the whole thing of, first of all, cask strength is perfectly legitimate. It's perfectly fine if that's what people like. The whole for blenders in a lab reducing to 20%, it's quite an old-fashioned thing to do, and there's one main reason, which is that's just where these blenders have decided they get the clearest aromatic analysis of a spirit, and they determine as clearly and as quickly as possible if there's off notes in that particular sample. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. This is something that is designed for, a part of a process which is eventually leading to very large batch blended Scotch whiskey products, not single casks, not, and to a certain extent, some malt whiskies, but not all. And, I think a lot of it is also perhaps from the fact that whiskey drinkers in Scotland and the UK generally, historically, would probably drown their whiskey. They probably put a big dram in a tumbler of a blended whiskey and drown it with soda, or they would be drinking about 20%. So there's probably an element of that feeding into that practice, which is sort of just stuck with the industry over the decades. But I certainly don't go down to that strength. I don't think it's practicable for the sort of products that we are all talking about and enjoying. I think you need to engage with the natural cask strength whiskey and at certain reduced points, but I don't think I ever reduced below 40%. I mean, that's a point at which, and it's probably the way I've trained my palate over the years, unconsciously. That's a point at which whiskey really starts to become a different kind of drink. That's when you need to start making highballs. Are we ready to go to the next dram?
We are. I'm really excited about this one because it's been a long time since we've seen like old Glen Garioch, and yeah, I'm excited about this one. And also I love the label on it. I love this kind of the simplicity of it. Yeah, I'm excited.
So I'm very, very interested in I'm very, very interested in people's opinions on this one because it has proven to be slightly divisive. I'm not drinking my own whiskies tonight. I'm having an old Bunnahabhain 12-year-old from the 80s.
As you do.
What I've got in the cupboard here at my mum's house. So, and I'm just about to finish it, actually. That's the very last of it. So with this one, this was a private cask that we bought. We look all over to find casks because it's very difficult to get supply these days. So we work with brokers, of course, but we also buy at auction and we buy from private individuals. And this is one we bought from private individual. And it's a 1991 Glen Garioch. It was matured for 10 years, first 10 years of its life in a refill plain oak hogshead. And then it was re-racked into a first fill port barrique for the remaining 20 years of its maturation. So this is a double matured, but like inverse double maturation of 10 years refill bourbon, very refill, and 20 years fresh port. And the natural cask strength was down at 41.4 by the time we bought and bottled it. So, I like it. I would not have bottled it if I didn't like it, but I'm really interested to see what everyone thinks about it. I don't often like port whiskies, but in this case, because it's had such a long time, I think the integration works well. And I think it's like kind of an old style sherry malt, but with a slight tartness and sharpness and more of a kind of berry fruit character coming from the port. But there's an opulence about this one and an easiness about it, and a kind of danger about it, because it's such a easy guzzleable cask strength, 41.4. You can, it's already sort of a highball. You could just, I could just drink this all day, this one. I really like it, but some people have said they find it a bit weird. I don't know.
The nose on this is crazy. I mean, I love it. And, Kurt and Harmony, Sean know this. Like, I generally do not like port cask whiskeys either. I find it's such an inconsistent cask type for maturation. But on this one, the nose, I love the palate. I think the palate, it's elegant. It's kind of old school. It has that sort of antique-y feel to it. But the nose has this crazy, like sour cherry meets like glazed root vegetables thing on it. And it's just really fun. It reminds me of a dinner I had at this kind of old school farm restaurant where, they use a cherry reduction to make a sauce for the elk. And it's all about seasonal vegetables. So like carrots, turnips, things like that, kind of gently glazed. This is really, really interesting.
I've never used elk in a tasting note, but next time I visit Canada, I'm going to make sure I arm myself with the requisite olfactory experience in order to start imbuing my tasting notes with all manner of elk and elk sauces.
Elk sauce.
Um,
Is there a bit of peat on the palate?
there probably is a little bit of peat in there. A lot of these batches of Glen from this era when they were still floor malting, it wasn't as heavy as pre-75 when they really were, putting a lot of peat in the production, but it probably would be a little bit of peat here and there, some peat in the mix. And so I do find a little bit of that on the palate, yeah. But at this age and this strength, it's so like sort of deep, buried deep in the mix, so like fragrant and subtle, and it's peat. When it gets that low down at this age, it really starts to get tied up with all sorts of other things like roots and herbs and all the things you described there, Andrew. I would put that in a category that I just call bouillon. So just like vegetable stock, or baked root vegetables, these kind of characteristics, which in some ways sometimes they can be negative, like in old bottle effect, old blends that have gone fusty, but in very interesting, complex, older malt whiskies, I think they really can be quite an asset because they're tied up with earthiness and spice and like pepper and umami, and certainly in a whiskey like this, someone mentioned licorice, I saw that, which I agree with, but that kind of that meeting point where savory and salty and sweet all kind of intersect and intermingle and do very fun, funky things. So I just love the opulence of this whiskey. I think it's crazy, mental, very unusual. It's not quite like any other, certainly not like any other Glengarioch I ever found. And I think one of the reasons I like it is that despite being 20 years in a fresh port cask, despite being a low ABV, there's still quite a lot about it that also makes me think, yeah, this is Glengarioch. It feels Highlandy. It feels like it's come from a interesting sort of distillate that's got quite a bit of texture and weight to it, and it's got charisma. So those are the reasons I like it anyway.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm with you. Like, it doesn't come across as really whiny, aside from it's a little bit grippy from the tannins and stuff, but it doesn't have that funkiness. It doesn't have that like kind of fermenty nastiness that most port casks carry with me. That's really cool.
We have a sequel bottling to this coming up in the next couple of months. The same cask owner also had a cask of 1992 Glenmurray with exactly the same maturation profile, 10 years refill wood, 20 years fresh port barrique. So I tried a cask sample. We agreed to do this deal off a couple of cask samples, and I tried the cask sample that was drawn like a year and a half ago. So I think it's going to be around about, that one to be a more punchy strength, be about 49% when bottled. And it's probably going to be a similar barrel of port to this one. It's I'm looking forward to that one. And we'll do, so that'll be edition 65B. That'll be the sequel bottling to this one, or the sibling bottling, and it'll be labeled up in a similar way, but similar but different. I've basically given my designer a pitch, which is very much, let's come up with another tribute to old knackered vintage port bottles. So yeah, looking forward to that one.
This bottle kind of reminds me of like a perfect pairing for like a Christmas dinner. Like you pair it with like a really like seasoned stuffing and the cranberry sauce, and like even like just like a dark chocolate. Like I was like, I love this bottle. I want to put it in my whiskey and chocolate tasting and buy myself one. And then I looked at the price and was like, damn you, whiskey sponge.
It's more damn you whiskey industry, and
for
not
real,
making anything in the 90s, and then everyone now wants it. So
it's just beautiful, and I love that, like the drying effect on this that I wouldn't have anticipated from a port cask. But yeah, to me it's like, it's beautiful.
I'm glad
There's
you like
so
it.
much happening.
Yeah, there is a lot of hard to pin down stuff going on in that whiskey. I still have sort of like a third of a bottle at home, which I'm going to go and revisit now, having having thought about
Yeah,
it again like this.
Like to me, it's like a holiday dinner, just like remove the meat. Like we're not specifically talking like turkey or ham. It's just all the fixings around it.
Maybe I'll make an incredibly decadent roast dinner when I get back, like get a joint of mutton and just do a pot roast with an entire bottle of 91 Glen Garioch in there.
Totally, do it.
I mean, it could work. I mean,
Good.
why not?
Sean, anything you want to add in there? Sean probably was around when towards the end of the days of Morrison Bowmore when we would still get the odd interesting old bottling of Glen Garioch. But this doesn't remind me that much of Glen Garioch so much. It's just a great older style whiskey. But Sean, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
It was, yeah, and I think I mentioned this a little while ago. Like one of the whiskeys when I first started that kind of made whiskey click for me was like one of those. I think it was an old 85 vintage, or maybe it was 86. I can't remember, but there was a couple vintages that they released at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was I don't know why, but there was just something about it. I was going through tasting random things, and that it just kind of clicked in my head. It's like, oh well. Now what am I going to do? now I'm poor forever. No. So I poured this about an hour ago, and I'm kind of glad that we're getting to it now. There's a bit of I think you can tell texturally, there's a bit of a fragility to it. Like when you're drinking it, like on the finish, it gets a little like, not thin, but you can tell it's old, it's low ABV, like everything about it. Like it's like, it seems like I never want to take a bottle and shake it because I'd be too worried that it would just fall apart in the bottle. Like it's so pretty and delicate, and you want to handle it with baby gloves almost.
I know what you mean. And that was also one of the things I was thinking about in terms of order in the lineup. Like I think the sign of a good whiskey is that it can withstand coming after something weighty and rugged like the Orkney and the Glenlivet. Even at that low strength, being quite a sort of fragile, delicate dram. And the fact it can still hold its own and stand up and speak with quite a clear voice, and amongst all these other whiskies that are by and large all quite heavy hitters compared to it in terms of ABV and sort of obvious power and character. So but yeah, no, it is a fragile dram in many ways. It is quite delicate, and there's nuance and complexity, and in an ideal world we'd probably have just have a big dram in a nosing glass and enjoy it probably on its own and spend quite a bit of time with it and treat it gently.
And imagine me, guys, when I should try those whiskeys, because when I came to Rotterdam 3 months ago, I was stuck to Angus stand for basically for the whole day, and I tried everything that he has on the stand. And imagine that roller coaster, because you try and whiskeys just absolutely not even different, just a polar different, and you have to make your opinion. And but anyway, after the few drums, it was a little bit easier, and at some point I understand, okay, I'm good. I'm safe. So it was good. It was good experience.
Every single one of those bottles contained Speyburn 10-year-old, Igor.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know your tricks. I know. Yeah. But
you coming? I just put all the real bottles under the counter.
Yeah, because I didn't pay for that. Yes, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
but Glen Garioch actually stands out definitely. For me, it was beautiful.
Oh, cool! I'm glad you think so. That's nice.
Yeah.
How the heck am I supposed to pick a favorite? These are all amazing, and we are only halfway. Well, that's the kind of comment I like to hear in my tastings. So are we ready to move along from the Glen Garioch?
Let's do it.
Cool. So we're moving into peat now. So going up a notch in terms of intensity. So this is the sort of bottling that I really like to do, which is stuff that wouldn't otherwise exist. And this is like a sub-series to Whiskey Sponge, a little sub-brand. So it's Whiskey Sponge Equilibrium. And the concept behind this is to create a flavor profile based around the sherry, or create a bottling based around the sherry and peat flavor profile. So lots of us love sherry and peat when it's done well. And I think it's quite difficult to find good modern sherried peated whiskies, because I think sometimes modern peaty whiskey doesn't always work well with modern sherry casks. They can jar a little bit. But seeing as we had a good relationship with Edradour, we were able to source some pretty good examples of Edradour itself, which is unpeated, of course, and its sibling make Belechin, which is peated, heavily peated, very heavily peated, up to about 50 parts per million. And we did the first equilibrium bottling, which was a mix of different vintages, different cask types, but peat and unpeated, and the resulting mishmash was, I think, really good, but quite drawn from quite disparate components. Whereas with this one, Equilibrium 2 that we're trying here, I wanted to take a much more narrow approach. So we selected 2 second fill sherry hogsheads, both filled in 2005, one of them with unpeated Edradour and one of them with peated Belechin. And the marriage of the two together, I think, created something really nice. It's still quite peaty, because Belechin is very peaty and peat just dominates everything in that kind of ratio. But yeah, I think you got a really nice rounded 16-year-old malt and the second fill sherry casks are pretty active sherry casks still. So you get a good level of sherry, a nice level of peat, very well integrated, really nicely rounded, and really focusing on that kind of like game meats and tar and like kind of heathery, earthy peat and tobacco and chocolate. Lots of lovely things going on in it. And I'm always interested to hear feedback on these bottlings, because I think I feel like they maybe went a wee bit under the radar to some extent, but it's really just a bit of an experiment and a bit of fun this series when we do it. And we may do a third one. I don't know. I haven't planned one in yet, but I was really happy with how they turned out. And it's the sort of thing that I'd like to do more of, which is essentially just blending and messing about and making potions.
Mm-hmm. It's I missed, but I got a bit of what you were talking about the sherry. And I remember about 14, 15 years ago, when we first started getting Edradour in Canada, it was completely different to the stuff that we're seeing from them today. And in the last 5 to 6 years, I've been quite impressed, especially with their younger whiskeys, about the quality of sherry casks that they're obviously getting access to, and they've kind of taken off. And yeah, it's a whiskey that I think was really under the radar for quite a long time for a lot of people, because the earlier incarnations of it that they tried maybe weren't as impressive as the stuff that followed. And I'm just kind of interested in your thoughts, because I know you've got a great relationship with Signatory and Edradour. Like, if you kind of have an insight into what changes were made and when, that have kind of made it a more interesting whiskey.
Well, I think that in terms of what changes were made, I think it was just a complete overhaul in terms of new staff and new approach. I think the people that were running it before, according to Andrew, were not not professional people in terms of their approach. I think they were, in his words, drinking heavily and chucking fairy liquid into the stills to use as antifoam. So this would go some way to explaining why Edradour in the 80s and 90s tastes pretty much dreadful. And he started from a position where it couldn't really get any worse, could only get better. And he did a very good job. He brought in Ian Henderson from Lafroig to help him run the distillery. He just went back to basics, cleaned everything up, and bought in good ingredients, good casks, and just made whiskey properly and used the equipment properly, and just more care and attention to detail, and not cutting corners, things like very simple things like that. I mean, Edradour historically was a good whiskey. It was just blighted in the kind of the few decades between the 70s into the 90s, where most of the stuff that we tried consciously as whiskey geeks in that era, you know, just gave it such a terrible reputation, which I think historically is not necessarily deserved. It's more of an unfortunately timed blip, really. But Andrew's done a great job with it, and one of my sort of, I've got lots of favorite bottlings that we've done, but one bottling I really like was the Edradour 2003 bottle. It has Whiskey Sponge edition. I can't remember, 30 something, I think. But we did an 18-year-old Edradour that was from 2003 and fully matured in a refill hogshead, a really old refill hogshead. So it was really pure, naked distillate. Great whiskey, really lovely, quite waxy, old school Highland style distillate. And it's a shame, I think, that Andrew hasn't bottled more refill casks like that. Oh, he hasn't even filled more refill casks like that. He's mostly filled first fill barrels and sherry and a lot of wine casks. But we were able to bottle one of only 2 refill hogsheads he ever filled, I think. So that was really pleasing to do that, and to be able to show and highlight the quality of the distillate they're making there. But I love Belechin as well. Some of my favorite whiskies he's made have been the peated ones, and that's why we've bottled quite a lot of them. We did a gorgeous 2003 second fill sherry butt Belechin as an 18-year-old late last year. Really exquisite sherry and peat fusion, like really dense, dark, gooey, earthy peat. Lovely, lovely stuff.
Yeah. Two things that reminds me of. One of the things that I've always loved about Andrew Symington and Edradour is, and you started talking about how like he took a different approach to physically running the distillery and the equipment. And I mean, you probably would notice this as much as anyone. He's an extremely hands-on owner. Like every time I've been to the distillery, he's emptying out the mash tun, running the bottling line, driving a forklift with empty pallets on it. Like the guy seems to revel in and love actually physically running the distillery.
Yeah. I mean, he's a man who's had dress boiler suits made to attend whiskey festivals, and you know, there's a reason that a lot of our labels, when we've taken whiskey from Edradour, they feature in one form or another a forklift truck on them, because this should really be Andrew's trademark, is his forklift truck. I've got a picture of him somewhere with a fully laden forklift on his mobile phone. I'm pretty sure, you probably shouldn't say that on tasting, but yeah, he's quite a character, and he absolutely is very hands-on. Doesn't like tourists. He was very glad that COVID enabled him to stop having to welcome bus loads of tourists to his shop. So I think he stands apart from quite a lot of other distillery owners.
If he really wanted to deter the tourists, he should have just made his distillery less picturesque, and then maybe he could scare them off.
Yeah, it's ironic that someone that fetishizes privacy as much as Andrew has bought probably one of the most picturesque and suitably tourist located distilleries in Scotland. But you know, he's really, the way to think of Andrew is not so much as a sort of traditional whiskey person. It's really much more as probably one of the first of the new wave of like crafty, small, private, you know, individual producers. It just so happened he was one of the first indie bottlers to go out and get himself a distillery. So yeah, it's he's done a great job, and it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up taking it next.
Well, and yeah, that's because they're going through a bit of a transition now with I think it's their German importer bought like a sizable stake, and his right-hand man, Des, who I've known for 12, 13 years now, is retiring. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. And obviously, you know, everyone, you know, people get older and things have to change, but he's been kind of the driving force behind it. And, you know, at some point that has to change. So,
but I mean, I think it's I think he's still going to be pretty involved for quite a long time, and yeah, things are in flux there at the moment. But you know, I think it's just, you know, they're reacting to the realities of the present day whiskey market. It's a challenging market, and you know, they're doing the right thing and adapting their business accordingly, I think. So yeah.
Cool. All right, guys, maybe starting with Sean, quick comments on the Edradour before we move on, or the Equilibrium.
Little burlier than I would have expected, I guess. Like, I guess I guess I shouldn't really be comparing, but I'm kind of, in my head, I compare a little bit to what they're doing when they're marrying their casks as well. But the peat on this is a little bit more intense. When I was sitting there, like, you can, yeah, I think you can tell, like, the peat is on the mainland. I got a really big hit of horse manure as soon as I brought it up to my nose, but that it kind of fades a little bit and it goes back down to just like a general farminess, which is really nice.
Harmony?
But the sherry on is like, I don't know, like it's again, like, it's not like super new school. It's kind of like straddles the line between a little bit of nice kind of new spice and a little bit of that old dried fruit as well. I don't know, I kind of like that. It's I guess and did I hear correctly? It's sherry and bourbon. Yeah, what was that? What it was?
No, they're 2 second fill sherry hogsheads, so it's
Right.
everything here is fully second fill sherry matured.
Right.
The first bottling, we did a mix of a 2010 first fill sherry, but with a 2003 refill hogshead. So that was the one where it was a bit more of a mishmash of different ages and styles. This one is more linear. It's more sort of just purely focused on one type of sherry, one age, and sherry and peat. Sorry, and peated and unpeated within that. So,
Oh, okay, I must have missed. I must have missed kind of construed the two.
no,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
pretty convoluted. It's easy to miss. Don't worry. There's lots of like weird geeky detail to try and get over when you're talking about these bottlings.
Hey, Harmony.
It's nice. It's big. It's sherried. It's peated. It's very nice. It's very balanced, I think, between the two styles. There's a lot going on. I wish I had a bigger pour and more time to enjoy it, but I drank it all, so it can't be bad.
Cool. Kurt?
This one actually kind of reminds me, take away the lactic note, but it reminds me of some of the cooler Oloroso sherried Port Charlotte and Lockendall casks I've tried with Alan at the distillery. Bruichladdich obviously a little bit more lactic and cheesy. And I did see somebody mention cheesiness, but it's got a lot of those hallmarks. And then Sean said the mainland peat. Again, similarly, Bruichladdich will be sourcing from Inverness, right? So it's that mainland style of peat that works with that Port Charlotte kind of style. So it's very Port Charlotte-esque. Do you remember that Duncan Taylor heavily sherry Port Charlotte we had before Jay moved on there? There's kind of similarities there.
Yeah. It maybe not so much for the peat, but for some other notes, it reminds me a little bit of like some, you know, late teens Bowmores I've had. And I even got like a tiny little bit of Parma Violet in there, which was kind of crazy. I was not expecting to find that in there. So, but yeah, cool whiskey. All right, Angus, I know we're getting late here, so I don't want to keep you too long. Should we move on to the Springbank?
Yeah, so a few months back, we were fortunate enough to be able to release 2 casks of Springbank. The 1994 refill sherry hogshead, which was bottled as Whiskey Sponge Edition 60A, but what you have is the follow-up, which is Whiskey Sponge Edition 60B, which is a refill hogshead from 1995, so just plain oak bourbon hogshead. Both of these were just bottled at natural cask strength, single casks, and it's Springbank. What do you want me to say? This one is my favorite of the two, and I'm not saying that just because it's the one you've got and you're pouring, but it legitimately was. I just thought it was purer, fresher. The strength had held up better here. It was 51.1% natural cask strength, and at that strength, it just carries over the right amount of power and the right amount of, you know, really vivid, fresh Springbank distillery character. And Springbank at this age, from this cask type, this vintage, just works so well. You know, it's just so beautiful, that really harmonious, soft, citrusy, slightly medicinal, slightly peaty tang, very coastal, honeyed, waxy, just layered gorgeousness. So I think it's a really good Springbank. I hope you enjoy it. I don't have any more fancy stories about it, I'm afraid. Well, I can tell you this is one of the ones we bought from a private customer as well. So both these casks came from the same guy.
Yeah, it's got the nose is beautiful, but the palate is absolutely gorgeous. The waxy tones, the saltiness, the faint whiff of smoke. It's just lovely.
Yeah, I mean they're just beautiful whiskies, these Springbanks, and it's the perfect age. You know, that's really hitting the sweet spot, that kind of age, that kind of strength. It's just gorgeous. And, you know, it sat in the warehouses in Campbelltown all of its life until we moved it shortly before bottling. So you're really getting, you know, full on Springbank all the way up to 11 here. It's really good.
Do you think it was protected from, you know, meandering warehouse tours, or how many bottles did you? I mean, Kurt and I, you know, especially have been to, and Igor have been to Springbank and numerous times, and especially a decade or more ago, that the tours would get a little crazy in terms of what you might start just randomly cracking into casks without checking them. But
I couldn't
did you get a
possibly
decent number of bottles?
I think we got the right number of bottles out of the cask.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty confident.
Yeah. Kurt, I know you've been a Springbank geek for a long time. I'd like to hear what you think about this.
So I don't know if you saw earlier, I went, oh my God, and I put my head down. I thought I was reaching for the Edradour and actually grabbed this glass by mistake. I took a sip and I was just like, holy shit, this was incredible. This is the kind of Springbank that should be what's driving the Springbank madness and hype nowadays. Unfortunately, most of the people that are going batshit crazy for it are not chasing this because they don't know about this. They know the new Springbank and they know that it's auction worthy and all that kind of fun stuff. This is the stuff that made the old school people fall in love with it. This is the stuff that we chase. This is that, like, these types of bottlings are really, really hard to get your hands on. So make friends with people that still have them. That's all I can say on that. It's beauty.
Yeah. Kurt, I don't know what you think about this, but like the closest approximation I've had in a long time to this was that 40-year-old signatory Springbank. It went a little bit more tropical than this.
69.
That's 69, but it's kind of going in that orange label one. It's going in that same direction.
There was a 2005 bottling of the 21-year-old as well, old school label. 2,400 bottles, I think, was all that came out of that. There's some hallmarks of that here too. Really,
the ones that were actually 30-something years old.
Yeah. Beauty was
allegedly. Yeah, Angus, I know one of the guys on this chat, Doug and I, Doug Page, we went to we were at the Old and Rare show just before that virus made things change.
That virus, yeah.
And we attended the Springbank masterclass that you did with Sikander, and I mean that to me is one of the coolest tastings I've had a chance to sit in on, just for a chance.
The one where Sikander was hungover and just sort of stood at the side and let me do all the work. Yeah, I remember that one.
He was a little rough that day. It's true.
Yeah, that was good fun. The problem with Springbank is that you're just sort of pouring people amazing drams and then trying to think of things to say about them other than, gosh, isn't it really delicious? But yeah, no, it's the one last kind of proper old style whiskey. For now, until new guys come along and really nail recreating that. But yeah, it's very impressive. You can say lots of things maybe about the way they do things or how they sell their stuff or whatever. You can always criticize, but it's hard to knock their whiskey making. And I hope the stuff they're making now stacks up against something like this when it too is hitting the kind of 20 to 25 year age point. But for now, they were making astonishing whiskey in the 90s, and
yeah,
it's a great privilege for me as a bottler to be able to put out something like this, and it's really a joy for it to be able to be shared with passionate whiskey lovers like yourselves as well. So it's nice to see everyone enjoying and tasting a bottle that's opened. So that's cool.
I can tell Igor has something. Sorry, Kurt. I can tell Igor's got something to say. If you can put a pin in that, we'll come back to it in just a sec here.
Yeah, it's just like I said, it's I cannot say more about Springbank. It's pretty obvious. It's a gorgeous whiskey, and only one thing that I can say, yes, it's actually another Springbank coming. I would say pretty soon. So
teaser. Save your pennies is what Igor is trying to say. Save your pennies. Sean, actually, Kurt, I'll go back to you. I know you were going to chime in with another comment there.
I just talked about that old school style of whiskey that's sort of a coelacanth now. Every now and then something comes up that you thought was gone. I would argue what's been produced and what's being produced at Ben Romick over the last little while is kind of leading us back in that kind of territory. I'm really excited to see how that distiller goes. And I think that's why we've concentrated so heavily on their casks recently in the store. Killer old school style of whiskey. Not quite Springbank level yet, but I think there's a very big potential that we'll be coveting really cool casks of Ben Romick sort of the same way in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think that's a good point. Yeah, I like Ben Romick a lot.
Yeah. Kurt, I'd add to that. I mean, it's still very young, but seeing a lot of promise from places like Ardnamurchan as well. And I mean, the other one, and we've been a bit spoiled in Canada getting access to it, but even whiskeys like Daft Mill, where it's kind of a whiskey style that's not rushed. It's not about maximizing the amount of output you can have through a place in a single year. It's about kind of producing things properly. And I think there's a handful of these new distilleries that are out there that have a lot of potential. But time is one of those elements that you need to have to get to something like this.
Another unwritten ingredient, right?
Exactly.
And the back end of this palate, all those grapefruit and tangerine and like all those cool overripe cantaloupe and stuff coming through the back end. It's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is a lot of fruitiness to it. Yeah, absolutely. That's always a sign for me of great whiskies, when you get real, proper, tangible, like pulpy fruit flavor. That's something that's missing so much from modern whiskies. It's a real hallmark of older style production, and it's something that I think was lost in Scotch whiskey quite considerably. Really, it's very sad. But it makes it all more exciting when you really find it. It's beautiful.
Sean or Harmony, either of you guys want to chime in before we move on? Harmony's saying no, she's speechless.
It's hard to know what to say about something like this. I mean, it's kind of one of those drams that you like to sit down and almost not overanalyze too much, because it's just so delicious and enjoyable. What I was kind of surprised about, like, everyone's talking about like fruit and barley and the smoke or anything, but I was getting like this cool hit of like grassy, fresh sliced jalapeno kind of notes on it, which was really kind of cool. It was a little bit of a, I don't know, out of left field, I suppose. Yeah. What it kind of reminded me, I don't have that much to compare it to either, but it did kind of bring me back to like being in the warehouse in October. We had a cask from the 90s refill bourbon that was also very kind of similar to it, although a little bit older. I think it might have even had a little bit more smoke on it, honestly, but it was such a special dram.
Cool, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I mean, it's luscious. I don't have any of my bottle open anymore because I drank it all. So
I can see why. Angus, a couple of there's one especially that I wanted maybe you to touch on, and then I've got a question related to it. Is one of the things that this whiskey makes me think about is going to events like Old and Rare, where people are pouring old independent bottlings of things that at the time maybe weren't as appreciated for what they were as people looking back at them retrospectively are now. But the amazing thing, and I know Kurt and I are definitely, and Sean as well, and Harmony are on the same page on this, like, love these older refill cask matured whiskeys. And I kind of want your thoughts on that, and your thoughts on that as a style, like this older refill cask style that for the geeks out there, a lot of us are chasing. But also a quick comment on something like the Old and Rare Show, which I know you're involved in, and what the future of that looks like. Because I mean, I've only been once, and it was like an incredible experience.
Yeah, so I mean, just on that style, it's kind of my favorite style as well, because you know, the simple, humble refill hogshead is like really the perfect vessel for maturing whiskey. If the whiskey, the distillate itself, is charismatic and well made and complex, if you have personality rich distillate, that's, you know, even if a lot of that personality is locked in as precursors and is not immediately expressed on the nose as spirit, a really good, quiet, gentle refill hogshead is like the perfect vessel for that, with sufficient time. And those styles of whiskey are beautiful at younger ages as well. I mean, Igor will wax lyrical as much as I will about 5-year-old Glen Grant, and 5-year-old Klein Leash, and all these like young, pale, refill wood matured, you know, naked, almost like just barley eau de vie bottlings. But there's such a beauty and a charisma and an elegance and a charm about these whiskies. They're so sophisticated, they're so nuanced, and they're so classy. Class is a word I keep coming back to with these whiskies a lot. Yeah, and you know, you're revealing the personality and the individuality of the distillery itself, which is, you know, I think one of the most romantic and, you know, touching and delicious things about whiskey is when you can really taste the DNA of where that whiskey's come from, and you get a sense of, you know, something really special was going on here. It had been made by people that knew what they were doing, and that unique accumulation of specific equipment, specific place, specific process, method, specific workforce, specific ingredients and time have all aligned to create something really beautiful, and it's presented in a way that's very vivid, very fresh, with nowhere to hide. That for me is the beauty of refill mature whiskey, like this Springbank, or like these old Glen Grants that I really love, and that Igor loves as well. And in terms of the Old and Rare Show, I don't really know what the future is for it, because of a little thing called Brexit, really. Caused a lot of problems, that whole malarkey. Just either me going over to Europe with my bottles to exhibit at shows, or a lot of European you know, exhibitors coming over to the UK and bringing their bottles or getting their bottles over here. It's just caused a level of complexity and headache-inducing frustration that has made it really difficult to do these kind of shows, especially in the UK anymore. So I'm not sure we'll be able to do it again in the form we did before, which is sad because we really enjoyed it. But, you know, there probably will be something like it in future. Whether I'm involved in it or not, I don't know. Whether it's the Old and Rare Show or a different type of show, I don't know. But I'm not going to stop working with old bottles and old and rare whiskey if I can help it. It's extremely expensive now. That's the other thing. The price of these bottles to open them is so painful and so astronomical. You know, to be able to open them and actually make money doing it is very difficult, which makes it, as a business proposition, a challenge. So there's lots of these things to think about. There's lots of challenges, but, you know, there's also quite a lot of us that would like to keep doing this. So I think just watch this space, and, you know, something may happen. But I don't know when that would happen. That's the only thing I would say.
Okay. Well, I mean, I suppose there's always places like Limburg, if
Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be old bottle shows in mainland Europe still, for sure. But in terms of something quite as focused and celebratory as the Old and Rare Show, I'm not sure situations on that front for the time being. I hope it comes back, or I hope that a show like it can come back, and I hope it can be done in the UK, because, and even better in Scotland, because obviously to be able to go and taste these, so, you know, drops of liquid history in the country where they were made is super cool.
I'd be down for that. I'm pretty sure a
Yeah.
lot of people on this chat would be too. So, all right, Angus, we've got one last whiskey to talk about here, and I knew you were at Ardbeg at a point, but my first visit to Ardbeg might have been around the time you were there, and I know the label on this whiskey features a woman that many people who've been following the industry for a while have gotten to know, and possibly like myself at times had quite a crush on, because she's just an absolute sweetheart. Yeah, let's talk
Yeah.
about your Islay malt here.
Well, so first of all, I'll say that the whiskey in this bottle is almost certainly Lefroy. And I wanted to do a series called Islay Sponge, and just try and find an example of as many of the Islay distilleries as I could to put in it over time. This features Jackie Thompson of Ardbeg, who was really a mentor to me in many ways. Actually, Jackie's an Islay whiskey legend, and a whiskey legend full stop. I think she's done an amazing thing. No one for the last like I wonder how much of Ardbeg's success is down to Jackie. Really, probably a significant chunk. She's deserves a lot more credit than she gets, I think. But anyway, I wanted to sort of riff on the idea of my histories in the industry. So you've got a young Sponge with his terrible sideburns here, wearing the Ardbeg tour guide t-shirt, battling with Jackie on what is actually the Ardbeg pier. But partly I also really just like confusing whiskey nerds and toying with them. So to do a whiskey which everyone thinks should be Lefroy, but hey, there's references to Ardbeg on it. What's that about? So it's really just to confuse people and sow discord and intrigue. But yeah, it should be Lefroy. All these parcels of unnamed Islay single malt from 89, 90, 91, 92, I think some 93s as well. It should all be Lefroy, because it's all, I've seen the casks. I've got one of the casks in my garage. Not full, sadly. It's all ex-Allied blending stock, or ex-Allied distillers wood. Now, Allied distillers in this time period owned Ardbeg and Lefroy, and when you taste this, it's not Ardbeg, in my view. None of them are. They all have this very particular, very specific fruitiness, which is pure Lefroy, in my view. So, when I taste this one, I think of green fruits and subtle tropical fruits up front with like a really nice, deep, layered, elegant peat smoke. The flavor of peat when it is aged. So after 30 years, 31 years in this case, in cask, in refill wood, refill American oak, you've just got this beautiful interplay between the fruit and the peat is very layered and very almost like sort of, I use the word wispy quite a lot, this kind of delicate little puffs of peat smoke in there, but it's still quite pure and still quite powerful, and you still got traces of iodine. You've still got this really lovely coastal vivacity that's pure Lefroy, pure South Coast Islay. And Lefroy's like my favorite whiskey. It's absolutely my, for emotional reasons as much as anything else. It was my dad's favorite. It's my favorite too. And so this is as close as we can get to bottling Lefroy, I think, is doing these Islay casks. And I'm happy we've been able to do a few of them now. They're tremendous whiskey, and yeah, another one where I would say I'm just pleased to be able to sit here and sort of share it with you all, and glad that you're all able to try it.
Yeah. We've seen some chatter here and we've seen other examples of this stock from Signatory, Pete's Beast, a few other bottlers, but and there do seem to be subtle differences from one to the next. But yeah, it's interesting to know that's like the likely source of it. I mean, there's always been a lot of debate about it. This one does taste more Lefroy like to me than the Pete's Beast 30 does, which to me, whether it's Lefroy or not, always felt more like a Kalila style wise. But this is, yeah, a beautiful, beautiful bottling, and it doesn't come across like Ardbeg at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it can only really be Lefroy, but I mean, I don't mind not naming it when, if it was named, it would be outrageously, impossibly expensive. And I also just think the beauty of it is enough for me. It's just really, organoleptically kind of gorgeous, perfect, complex, old Islay whiskey, and specifically old Lefroy, which is great.
Kurt, I think you wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, I've been dying to try this one. Probably way offside, but I was referring to this one as Jackie juiced. All the people I spoke to, assuming it was Ardbeg just based on the label. It's cool to know that it's Lefroy. I think Sean, possibly Harmony, have heard me say this, and Andrew possibly in tastings too for our more high-end stuff. Old Lefroy to me is always orange notes and a little bit of lime and a little bit of really, really faint fennel or black licorice, things like that. And this has all those hallmarks, those orangey fruit tones, tangerine, mandarin kind of almost behind it. Really, really pretty. I can totally see the right here.
Harmony, thoughts?
Yeah, it's very pretty. Lefroy for me isn't a big one for me that I buy often, but I do enjoy it, and this is beautiful. I mean, if all Lefroy's tasted like this, I would probably drink more. But yeah, that citrus note on the finish really like brings it all together. At the beginning on the nose, it's like very, very smoky, very ashy. It's what you expect from Islay. It's all of those things, but on the palate, on the younger ones, obviously it's just overpowering. And I haven't got much of the fruit undertones like I am right now. And it's really beautiful. It's very nice.
Sean and I were on Islay in the fall, and Sean briefly, as often is the case, got a chance to meet Jackie. And I mean, to your point, and Sean maybe got a small taste of this. I don't know how she's managed it for the last 20 odd years, but she seems to be everything to all people at all times when she's there, and she doesn't get to stop moving or ever seem to take a day off. But such a gracious host. And Sean, when we were over there, we were lucky. We got to try a bunch of the 19s and a bunch of the 25s side by side. And Sean, I just kind of like to get your thoughts on this. We got to try some old Lefroy too, but certainly nothing quite like this.
Yeah, I think actually I think the Ardbegs were the oldest thing that we tried over there. To be honest, I stuff even in its late 20s, with the exception of the OBs, I have so little experience with the exception of like we've been really blessed in the past year to get all these cool unnamed Islas in their late 20s, even early 30s. But yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest, I don't have a ton to say about it. Like, there's just something about these. Like, I've said it to people many times. Like, there is nothing like old peat. There's just nothing like how it fades. It's irreplaceable, and it's still, it costs. Yeah,
There's not a lot of it. So
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think the thing about peat, as it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the fact it is an ingredient, and peat plus time creates a level of complexity in whiskey and a level of specificity around flavor and a level of detail that it's very hard to beat. Once you've got that flavor of peat, you've got the taste for it. Mm-hmm. It's an experience which is extremely hard to beat. It's extremely hard to replicate anywhere else. And there's just a level of kind of beauty about what you're tasting, which is really profound. I mean, I still remember the first time I tried Lefroy 30-year-old, the original in the sort of wooden box, 1990s bottling. Still one of my, favorite whiskeys. It just gorgeous, gorgeous whiskey. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to have bottled something like this. I think it's pretty exquisite, and yeah, that's the thing. When you get really good whiskies, you run out of things to say about them very quickly because you just go, yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's exactly actually what I want to say. And I'm, it doesn't matter for me. Is it Lafroy, Goard, Beck, or you can call it whatever you want. And but when it's whiskey so great, you don't need to think too much. You're just enjoying the moment. Because it's triggering all kinds of memories, all kinds of, I would say it's a lot of romance over here in your glass. And it's almost like fairy tale. That's for me, old Islay, good Islay whiskeys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Harmony, sorry, you had a question.
Sorry, and maybe I missed it. I apologize if I did. Is this you mentioned the Springbank was a secondary purchase from a collector. Is this a bottle from the distillery or secondary as well?
No, this is from Signatory stock, although there's quite a few parcels of this on the market. I don't know where they came from originally, but they got passed around a few brokers and ended up at Signatory, and a few other bottlers have had stocks of this.
Okay.
But unfortunately, by the time it got to Signatory, several tiers of margin had been added in, and so our price was higher than some other people's price. But still, it was worth it to get some really good casks. So
Absolutely, I would say it's
yeah.
worth it. It's beautiful, and as Igor said, it's a romantic sort of experience.
Absolutely, yeah, it absolutely is.
Thank you.
In terms of like you said, it was like a parcel of like allied stock. Is there any kind of scope of the size of that stock or how it might have gotten parceled out or anything like that?
Well, it was, so it would have been on the books and intended as being aged for purposes of blending, but presumably someone just saw this big parcel of stock and thought, we need to release some cash. This is marketable now in this day and age. This can be single malt. And what happened a few years ago was this whole parcel was vatted and put back into casks. So it was consolidated and put back into the same casks. So it's quite interesting. So there's quite a lot of similarity between many of these bottlings, but now the ones that have been left for a bit longer are starting to really diverge again and become more like proper true single casks. But it's pretty interesting, the story behind this parcel. I would love to know it in more detail, like where it originally came from. Someone will have a proper record on the book somewhere of exactly what it is and what the story was. But yeah, it was not uncommon for distilleries and to do swaps like this and take the name off and just say Islay single malt for blending. But the fact we know it comes from allied distillers and the vintages it is, that's what makes it pretty clear what it is, thankfully, I think.
Well, I mean, and Angus, I'm sure you've seen these too, but I mean, there's also a lot of this sherried Macallan-esque stock that often ends up in reasonably large quantities on the open market too, because maybe they blended it earlier on thinking that they were going to include it in a blend, or possibly it's stock that they just simply can't sell or don't know what to do with. So they're looking for an outlet for it and looking to recoup something from the asset they're sitting on. But yeah, it would be fun to know what the origin or what the purpose behind it or where it was intended to go. Because we see
absolutely, there's so many parcels like that where you just don't know. But the answer usually is, with anything that was filled in the 90s, is that this was originally intended as just blending stuff. Swaps for blending is what it would have been. But now that the market has changed and there's this stuff as sold into the brokers or indie bottlers market is very valuable. So that changes the minds of a lot of people who are managing the books for these companies.
I'm going to launch a quick poll here in a moment for people to choose their favorite whiskeys. You're going to get to do it twice. You'll get to do it once for your first favorite and twice for your second favorite. And this is just for no other reason than curiosity. We like to know, which bottles resonated with people the most here tonight. And I know Harmony commented on this earlier. It'd be tough to choose just a couple because I think we've had a dynamite lineup of whiskeys here tonight. So I'm going to fire that up and let that roll. And this is more maybe a combination for Igor, but also for Angus. I know we've got some other stuff coming in the near future, and I don't know if you maybe want to give us some teasers of a few of the things that are coming. And sorry, Angus, Igor may have a better idea of this than you do. I think he's trying to unmute there.
No, go for it. Over to you, Igor.
Igor, you're still muted, unfortunately. Technical difficulties.
Yes. No. I cannot close the poll.
Oh.
Because finally I closed the poll, so it's good. So anyway, yes, it's quite a few interesting things coming. It's actually, we're gonna have another bottling of Lafroig. I think it's the same age.
Yeah, it's a 1990. It's Whiskey Sponge edition 61, which was the first time we got the 1990 stock. It was.
We're gonna have some interesting returning stuff. We're gonna have small parcels of the probably a little bit of Orkney, a little bit of Glen Garioch, and we're gonna have lots of new whiskeys, which I'm not really want to say too much, because it's guys, let's leave it as a surprise a little bit. But it's gonna be substantial shipment from Angus, from the Decadent Drinks, and I'm very happy actually that we working very closely and we making decisions very fast, I guess. So we have an excellent meeting with Angus, and actually with your mutual friend Julie Hamilton, which became ambassador for the Decadent Drinks right now.
Oh wow, cool.
Yes, so quite a news. So she actually asked me to say hello to everybody.
Oh, that's great. Julie's a gem.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a good friend, and she's been a great addition to the team. So she's going to be our proper brand ambassador. So maybe she'll be doing a tasting like this for you at some point in the near future.
Yeah, because the problem is Angus so tied up with his daughter and family, and overall lazy guy. So he actually
I'm very lazy.
He actually hired Julie Hamilton to be his actually, kind of ambassador.
To do my job for me.
Yes, actually to do his job. Obviously, because he don't want to even come to any shows anymore. He don't want to come to any countries anymore. Like, that's it.
That's not true. I want to come.
Okay.
Well,
yeah,
if and when that does happen, we'd love to have you, but we'd also be happy to have Julie, because
I'd love to come to Canada. I will come at some point. It's just
please.
bandwidth and time.
Between kids and Canadians, Angus is in high demand.
Yeah.
I need to get permission from the real boss in all this, which is my partner Lucy.
Yeah, I actually would like to meet Lucy and kind of quietly beg her to release you for maybe 1 week, and that you come to Canada, because actually I would like to have you here. And we're gonna.
I'd love to come to Canada.
Yeah, we're gonna travel.
I will come to Canada again at some point. It's definitely gonna happen.
Okay, perfect.
Don't you worry.
All right. We'll maybe pause the guilting Angus into coming to Canada for a moment to share the results of round one. And I'm not entirely surprised by this, but it seems the Springbank stole the show for round one. The Islay Malt second, and honorable mentions for the other three, though curiously none for the Glenlivet, which surprised me, because that was probably the most surprising whiskey to me in the entire lineup tonight. But more on that in a moment. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to trigger the poll one more time, and this is for your second favorite. You can let us know what your second favorite whiskey was tonight. If you have any other questions, quick questions you want to ask Angus before we let him go, before we let them call it a day, please put those into the chat. Yeah, I'm going to quickly ask Sean, Harmony, and Kurt what your favorites were. So starting with Sean, what were your two favorites tonight if you had to pick just two?
I'm not gonna pick the Springbank, not because it's not my favorite, but because come on, like it's like whatever. I'm gonna say I think it's the Islay and the Glen Garioch. I think the Islay is kind of it's another one that's like, how could you not pick that in one way or another? But the Glen Garioch I think was like barring those two, the Glen Garioch was probably my favorite of the rest.
Okay, cool. Harmony?
I echo. Springbank and the Islay malt are fantastic and were on my top two. But then third choice was Glenlivet, fourth was Glen Garioch. Both fantastic. And I only picked that order because I can't choose. And I tried the Glenlivet first. So it just,
There you go.
that's how that went.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Kurt?
Yeah, the Springbank for sure. Behind that, I think the Islay Malt and the Glenlivet would be my follow-up to those. I love that Glen Garioch, but the Glenlivet just kind of came out of left field for me. Just if I can have a sec while the poll's finishing off, Andrew, before we ask you yours. Angus, this is cool to do this. I've been following you for quite some time. It was cool to finally have somebody whose palate tracked really close to mine. The only person I could trust reviews from before was kind of Serge, and then Ruben kind of behind him. But I find you track very much along where I like my whiskeys. So it's to have somebody bottling whiskeys with that palate as the guiding light, it kind of makes almost everything a sure bet for me. So that's really cool. But I got one question to throw your way. You lambasted, and somewhat good-naturedly, a lot of people and a lot of companies and a lot of distilleries with the sponge before anybody knew. Now, there was a hint in a post that Serge had done a long time ago about a young kid that was like a sponge soaking things up. I can only assume that was you.
Yeah, that would be me.
Did you ever deal with any kind of backlash from, some of your...
Not really. I had a few legal letters over the years. I got a legal letter from Tears. I got one from Rare Whiskey 101.
Did you get one from Blair Bowman recently?
No, I didn't. I got a Merry Christmas WhatsApp after I posted that. I try not to punch down, try to punch up. And the sponge is, by and large, the majority of what was on there is, I would say, reasonably good-natured, and most of it is just gibberish. Most of it is just surreal nonsense from my brain and my weird, warped sense of humor. It's not cruel, it's mostly celebratory, I think. There are occasions when it does get a bit sharp and properly satirical and barbed, but that's usually for big companies that damn well deserve it, because they should figure out a way to do better than just peddling crap for, crap and lies, which is what
Or
they
greasy-haired retro
seem to
babes
do.
who don't need to be mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things that I think most people in the industry actually quite liked the sponge, and I think it got quite a lot of goodwill from. I had so many messages from people saying, they just keep it up. It's really good. We're not allowed to say that publicly, but we like it a lot, which is nice to hear. It's fun, and it makes me feel like I was doing something right with it.
That's cool.
Not that it's dead. I'll still keep doing it for a little while, I think, but I'm so busy. I rarely get a chance to properly write a post. So.
And I swear, guys, I know Angus for many, many years. He's actually a very nice person. I'm serious. I'm not joking this time.
Don't let the truth out, Igor.
Okay. It's just a very close circle of friends, so I can say something like that.
Andrew, what did you like, buddy?
So like Sean, I'm going to exclude the Springbank because I don't think it's fair. I'm actually going to go Glenlivet #1. Like, that really blew me away. I think it had next to the Springbank, my favorite nose in the entire lineup, and it delivered right through the palate. And partly for nostalgia reasons, I love that Glen Garioch. There's something about it that's now starting to come across like an old tawny port, like a really, really old tawny port. And I love the fact that I can taste the port on it, and I don't hate the whiskey, which is not something I can generally say about old tawny port. Or old port finished matured whiskeys, or port finished whiskeys, period. Which is really cool. Now, Igor, did you have a chance to sample all of these? You've tried them all. We didn't ask you. Do you have 2 favorites that you want to share before?
I'm actually, I can tell you just a very short and interesting story, because the most, when we already begin to talk with Angus about bringing whiskeys to Canada, I was a little bit kind of, worried about Edradour, about Equilibrium actually, and because when I came to Rotterdam, it was one of first whiskey that I tried, because I'm not a huge fan of Edradour, and that stigma of those not so successful bottlings from the past still kind of strong. And I was like thinking, what the hell, Angus, like, come on, you released an Edradour, and it was like, just curiosity and everything. And when I tried this blend, in my opinion, it's absolutely great whiskey. So I really love it, for example. And again, it's very difficult. It's such a kind of difficult lineup today. Difficult in a way that it's so difficult to compare those whiskeys, because we have a absolutely amazing opener as a Tullibardine, because it's very light and beautiful in his own way. Great Orkney, because you cannot beat this Orkney. Very unusual, but amazing Glenlivet. But for me, like I said, the biggest surprise still probably Equilibrium.
That's cool.
I'm
And
glad you like that one, Igor.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's a very varied lineup you've had tonight. It's quite a diverse selection of drams, so it's really cool, and it's nice to hear everyone's feedback. And yeah, it's always interesting for me getting response and feedback and getting to see what people think of the whiskies we've selected, because it's one thing to write a tasting note for bottling by somebody else or a different company or something totally not connected to you, but when you're doing your own bottlings, it becomes very hard to separate that out and to be as analytical and as dispassionate, or as to sort of step outside that sense of yourself. It's quite hard. So yeah, I need to be able to get feedback from people. It's very valuable to me in order to to be confident and be certain that we're doing the right thing, and that we are putting out good quality bottlings. And yeah, so that's cool to do things like this.
On that
I'll
note,
just say before I wrap up, thank you very much for organizing this tasting. Companies like us can't exist without support and and good customers like yourselves spreading the word and bringing like-minded people together like this. And so thank you to Igor, and thanks to Andrew and all the team for sorting this out. We really appreciate it, and hopefully I can support you guys again in future, do more tastings like this, and one day come to Canada as well. So yeah, thank you very much.
sounds good. Angus, once again, thank you very much. I put the results there from the round 2, and interestingly, the Glenlivet won the second favorite round. So kind of cool to see those results. But I think the more impressive thing is that there's a consistent interest in almost all of them throughout. So all of them were getting votes at various points. It was a great range. Angus, we know it's a late night for you, and probably with a small child in the early morning. So I want to say a big thank you to you for doing this tasting. It was awesome. I know this is going to be a highlight for a lot of people, and the virtual tastings we do. And yeah, thank you for what you do. Thank you for the sense of humor that you've added to the industry over the years. I know Kurt and I especially if I'm stressed or bogged down at work, Kurt will often be like, hey, have you seen the latest Whiskey Sponge post? And I'll go in and check it out. And but also, you know, we've also appreciated having a voice that gives us some clarity when we're trying to make decisions in terms of what to buy without getting a chance to try it first, and having not just the scores, but more importantly, the tasting notes from guys like you and Serge made it a lot easier for us to weed through the chaff at times.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. So thank you very much. It's always makes me happy and humbled to get kind feedback like that. So I'm glad that you know, my hobby of collating often silly tasting notes on Whiskey Fun is something that has a little bit of meaning and entertainment. So thank you for saying that. I'm pleased to hear it.
Our pleasure. Well, I think on that note, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you everybody for taking part in the tasting. It's a mild, almost 10 degrees here this afternoon in Calgary. So takes a lot to get people to stay inside in the middle of winter with a day like that. But with a range of whiskeys like this and a host such as yourself, Angus, it's no hardship. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Stay well. Look forward to chatting with you.
Can I say one thing quick?
Yeah.
If anyone, well, I mean, those of out of town, it's a little bit too late, but we're doing rums on Thursday night. It's virtual. We're pouring 2 of Angus's rums as well. I think
cool.
Foursquare
Nice.
and a Clarendon.
Yeah.
So if anybody's in town, they want to join, it's $50. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. And I'll actually make this, if you're out of town and you want a tasting kit for that tasting, we'll help keep the cost down for you to overnight it or whatever to get it to you in time. So just put that in the memo field and Sean and I'll figure it out at some point. But good plug there, Sean. There's also a couple of sponge bottlings in our rare and old spirits tasting, which Igor is going to help us with in April, which has got a bunch of, well, it's got over 400 years of cognac and Armagnac and Calvados. So hopefully you'll check that out with us too. Anyway, Angus, get some sleep. Thank you for doing this again. Igor, thank you. Kurt, Harmony, Sean, thanks for being on here tonight. Have a great night, everybody.